Good afternoon. Today is February 22nd, 2023. My name is Patrick Daglaris, and I am with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at the Oklahoma State University Library. Today, I'm talking with Dwight and Mary Helt. Is it Helt?
Yes.
Okay. OSU alum and employees. They both attended OSU in the 1970s, and today we'll be talking about a 1972 folk festival on campus as one of the focuses of this interview. Dwight also worked in the Office of High School and College Relations on campus before pursuing full-time ministry in the Episcopal Church before retiring in 2019. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay. We will talk about their experiences on campus as students and employees, as well as their life more generally before and after college. This interview will be part of our Stories from Oklahoma State University Oral History Project of the OSU Library. Thank you so much for talking with me today.
Pleasure to be here.
So to get started, just tell me a little bit about yourselves. Whoever wants to go first.
Go ahead.
Okay. I guess that you say that Mary and I have been married for about 48 years now, and that while we have a big portion of our life together, we have a small portion of our life apart, quite honestly, because we met briefly before coming to OSU, or before her coming here. And so I grew up in a house of 6 brothers and sisters in Oklahoma City, and kind of a blue-collar family. Went to public schools and then came to OSU. That's pretty much it from my upbringing. We were not a particularly religious family. We didn't go to church really at all. I was not an athlete, but I did enjoy playing in the band and played French horn for a brief while. And my big love at the time was architectural drawing. And I, in fact, majored in architecture when I came to OSU, architectural engineering, before I changed my mind and decided to get into religious studies and philosophy. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of a thumbnail of what brought us up to the point of going to OSU.
Yeah.
I have 3 brothers. I was born in Ardmore, but we moved several times. Lived in Miami, Oklahoma City, in Norman. And my family actually lived in Norman whenever I was going to come to college. But I knew I wanted to come to OSU. I'd come to Future Teachers of America meetings in Stillwater and stayed in the dorms. And I wanted to come to OSU, and that was just no problem, So that's what I did. I met Dwight a week before I came for my first week of school in Oklahoma City. And then the first weekend I was here, my roommate and I were walking around that weekend looking for where our classes would be and going from building to building. And we ran into Dwight with one of his roommates that week, and I just kept running into him from then on. That first semester, I worked for the track coach, and every Monday he would ask me if I was engaged yet. He still felt like in 1972 that you should get married and that you were here for your MRS degree, as he called it. So he always asked me that.
What coach was that?
The track coach.
Do you know his name?
I do not remember his name at
fine.
this point.
Mm-hmm.
I am sorry.
That's okay.
My sophomore year, I started working in the library on the 4th floor circulation desk. And I worked there until I graduated. And then at the time, the curriculum materials lab was on the 5th floor with Ann Hoyt. And she hired me to be her assistant. So I worked there until the reserve room position opened up. And then I worked in the reserve room. We had our first child, Matthew Helt, while I was working in the reserve room. That was in 1978. And then we had our second child is a daughter, and she was born in Stillwater also. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell. I pursued the degree in library science and then went on to become a school librarian until I retired.
Okay.
We both attended the same high school, which is an interesting part of that story, and didn't meet during high school at all. Mm-hmm. I had classes with her brother, in fact, and big school, never met. So serendipitously, a week before a mutual party, and then the first day of school, and then second or third day of school, I ran into her at the student union just downstairs, and she was in line for something for books or something, and I saw her there, and she wrote her phone number down my sack, and so I saw that as a good sign. So eventually called her a couple weeks later. I was kind of slow at the time, and our first date was at the student union here, watching a movie called Friends in the $1 movie night. So I've always been cheap from the beginning. So, but that seemed like a good idea, that I should probably listen to that serendipity there. I was did not work my first year here because I was able to get enough scholarships. I didn't have to, and one of those scholarships was a President's Council scholarship. And part of that scholarship was to do volunteer work for the high school and college relations as a tour guide. So I did that, loved it, and other things too, other events and so on around campus. And so I got to know Russell Conway, who was the director at the time. And the following summer, I was looking for work, and I was looking, any work would have been fine. I looked on pizza, construction, hardware store. I checked all those places, not a job in town. It was getting late in the summer, so discouraged and hot, I would plop myself down in his office and just to talk to the secretary and to, complain basically and have something cold to drink. And she said, "Why don't you talk to Russell?" So I went in and had a chat with him. I thought I was just having a chat with him. At least that's what I thought. And then I go back home, and a week later he calls me up and he hired me to go to work for him as a student, as a sophomore. To be a university representative. At the time he would do that, he would hire students, and because the budget would allow that. And so for the next 2 years, I traveled every Tuesday and Thursday to some school in Oklahoma, usually 3 schools in one day, to bring information about OSU to seniors, counselors, and so on, principals, and loved it. It was a great job. And from being a person who had only spoken in public maybe a handful of times, performed guitar in public maybe once or twice, that job really did help me get out of myself. And more than anything, having to go into a situation where you didn't know what was going to happen. You could go in and have 12 students, you could go in and have 300 students, you could have a very friendly OSU crowd, a very not so friendly crowd. You could have a principal who was excited about you being there. You could have a person who simply dumped you with the students and walked out the door and left you to fend for yourself. So all those you had to deal with, and the presentation could be 10 minutes long or an hour and a half long, so you had to be really flexible. And I got to where, after being terrified at first, I got to where I really was excited about the challenge, and can I rise to the challenge this time, and so on. So that was a lot of fun. So it was a very good job. And Russell really, really was a person who trusted his employees and gave you lots of trust and permission, gave away authority so that you could just do a lot of creative things. And I always appreciated that and thought he was really kind of the perfect boss in that regard. And as long as you kept him informed and he knew what was going on, he could trust you, which was great. So I did that till my senior year, and then my senior year I had some classes that were 5 days a week. So he allowed me to get into a different position, which was to schedule other people's trips. And so I did that for a year, a lot of time on the telephone. And then after that, we decided to go ahead and stay in Stillwater because Mary had another year to finish her degree. We had been accepted to go to seminary at the time and just decided it was not the right thing to do for her sake and for other reasons. And so we just kind of settled in Stillwater. We just said, we're just going to live here and enjoy Stillwater, which is a great place. And it was a fantastic time. We just, probably one of the best times of our lives was when we were here, enjoying that, working just down a few buildings apart on campus, walking or driving to work every day, sharing lunch, and just having a good time. So I went to work full time after I graduated for high school and college relations for several years. And it was during that time that a professor at the university who knew me from church asked me if I would help out the humanities department teaching a course in humanities, although I wasn't qualified to do so. I didn't have an advanced degree. She wanted me to have that experience and felt like I could handle it, so I taught a course in Humanities 101, and which I was, they gave me the textbooks and a grade book. I shouldn't say this. Textbooks and a grade book, and then said, "Go get them." So that was what happened.
Mm-hmm.
But I enjoyed it so much, and it was her purpose to get me to enjoy that. So I go back and get my master's, and so I went back and got a master's in higher education, teaching, and administration.
Do you remember which professor that was?
Well, my professor, who was the one who really saved my life numerous times and helped guide me with it, was Tom Carmen, who was my major advisor, Thomas Carmen.
Okay. I want to go back. We'll get back to the OSU time, but I have a couple questions about before you got here. I was wondering if you could talk about growing up in Oklahoma City, that experience generally. What did you do for fun? I'm thinking about, I know you had a music background, I think, and even in high school. So if you just kind of bring me back to what it was like growing up at that time. Where did you live in town? What neighborhoods, areas, things like that?
Well, we lived go ahead.
It was in the northwest part of Oklahoma City, and we actually lived pretty close to each other. Northwest Classen was the high school. Taft was the junior high. And actually, when I was in high school is when they started busing for Oklahoma City. So the high school changed. I stayed at the high school because our house was just a block away, but many students were bused across town, and then others were bused in to help with integration at that time. A lot of pretty much what we did for fun was I was in a lot of clubs in high school, so we had pep club and went to a lot of games, went to all the games, and would go to the movies, but played tennis and went swimming a lot.
Yeah. We were a family that pretty much didn't get out a bunch, and so we kind of, with a bunch of kids at home and not a lot of money or anything, we kind of stuck around each other. So a movie here or there, amusement park in the summertime, something like that, a family vacation. Of course, my dad only got a week off, and so it would just be here to the state. So, but, I enjoyed the idea of simply kind of sticking around, and had just a handful of friends, one who is still a friend of mine now, Chris Corbett, who was a college roommate and still a good friend. I talk to him all the time. And we would go to 89ers games, which was the Oklahoma City baseball team at the time, and things like that, just kind of low-key. I picked up guitar at 13, and then by the time I was 15, 16, I started playing. I thought my own mind well enough to do a few things, and so I would play at a local restaurant from time to time and at a school talent show and that kind of thing. And then met a guy who was a much better guitar player than I was, and he started teaching me how to be better, and he wound up being my freshman year roommate. But for fun, it was pretty low-key. It wasn't, I didn't have a car, nor did Mary during high school, so unless you had your brothers, I guess. So.
Well, the one thing we did would go to Charcoal Oven and just drive through and get a Coke. I mean, you'd go get a Coke a lot. Just go someplace, and Charcoal Oven was kind of our school's neighborhood drive-through joint that we would go to. So we would do that. Also volunteered to do a lot of ushering because I was in Courtesy Club. And so we ushered for a lot of events, like the National Rodeo used to be in Oklahoma City. So we'd always usher for that and for plays.
Mummers Theater.
Mummers Theater was there still.
I had interest in architecture back then and took a lot of classes in Northwest Class in architecture, which led to a job working for a construction company. So I was a draftsman and an all-around errand boy for a construction company. So that was my afternoons every day till, from the time school was out to about 6 or 7 every evening. So, and then walk home from there. So no car, so you walk home. So.
And you mentioned, so when was it in high school, integration was kind of rolling out? You mentioned busing and things. Is that something, is there any memories or things you can talk about that experience?
It wasn't really a bad experience for me. I know a lot of people did have bad experiences, but I didn't have any bad experiences so much with the actual involvement with. between it. Your experience might have been different.
Mine was
than
different because I was a year ahead of you, but also because my family wasn't as open-minded as hers. Her dad's also an Episcopal priest, and he was ordained at that time, and they had always had a very open and loving and caring family that was not prejudiced in any way. And I grew up in an environment that wasn't like that. And so while I didn't really share those views so much, that was in the background. But the main thing is watching the parents and the students who reacted so horribly the first couple of days. In fact, there were almost riots, I would say, in the school. The school still is revolved around a big area in the middle, and there were American flags being waved and chanting and go home and all of that kind of stuff going on for several days. Yeah. Disruption of classes and so forth. Judge Luther Bohannon was the federal court judge who established that order, so he was being denigrated in the news and replaced too. But it calmed down after a while. But there were some things. There was a stabbing just down the hall from where my architecture class was. There was a fight with a guy that got stabbed and had to go to the hospital. My older sister was accosted and roughed up, and Mary's brother was roughed up one time after a game, but that was a separate kind of thing. But so there was racial unrest is one way to describe it. Mm-hmm. But I have a lot of younger brothers and sisters, and by the time they were in school just a few years later, like 4 years later and 6 years later, it was just a non-issue. Mm-hmm. It just completely had passed.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you remember what year that was? What grade you were in high school?
I would have been a sophomore or junior. What were you, just a sophomore?
I thought I was a sophomore, so you would have been
I
a junior.
graduated
I don't think it happened
so
my
it would have been
freshman
68
year.
maybe, something like that.
Yeah.
In that ballpark,
Mm-hmm.
I remember being surprised that parents were out there. Mm-hmm. I thought, boy, these kids are going to get in trouble when their parents find out they're yelling things that inappropriate.
Then you look out, and
I looked out, and the parents were out there with them, and I remember being surprised by that.
Mm-hmm.
There was a family that was very involved in the protesting part, and the last name had one letter difference from ours. And so it was like, it sounds like, was that them? No, it wasn't us. Promise, we weren't the ones. So,
Wow.
Yeah, that was it was a very formative time. I think it did shape a lot of my thinking about the issue, because I could see both the difficulty of, I think, is this cross cultures. I mean, it was a cultural shock. Music and dress and the types of dance and the drill teams and the bands, everything was different for us. I mean, being really white, it was very, very, very different. And so it just took a while for people to adjust and to accept. But I think overall, looking back, I think it was probably one of the quickest ways and best ways to make that happen, because it wasn't going to happen demographically by itself, because of the way those neighborhoods are just set up economically. They were just going to stay that way. So the other result was several of our teacher friends, the teachers we liked a lot, took off and went to private schools. And so we lost a few good teachers to that, and lost some friends to the private schools as well. So Heritage Hall, which was one of the ones that still exists, was really was established as a white flight school. And so those dimensions began to take place. Edmond and to some degree Norman began to pick up people from that, Putnam City. So the people would spread out to the suburbs more, push out, where they felt like they could have a culture more to their liking, and that happened a lot. And that still is true in Oklahoma City, I think.
Yeah. Do you remember any black teachers that came in, or was it predominantly students?
Yes, there were black teachers. My freshman English teacher actually was a black woman. So, and
remember her name by chance?
No,
that's okay.
But there was a history teacher. What is her name?
Clara Looper.
Clara Looper, that was there also. She's very well known.
Oh yeah,
she came and taught at Northwest Classen.
Did either of you have a class with her, or
I
that
did
was
not.
after?
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, the teachers, I think, were on the whole, very helpful, and trying to keep things calm, trying to help us through the transition and everything. And it took me years and years and years later to think about what would have been like on the other side of that, because I had friends who went to Northeast and Northwest were the ones that crossed over, but went to Northeast, and they kind of described that experience to me from the other side. And so I thought it would be terrifying to come into that, Northwest Classroom at the time was like a American Graffiti movie or something. I mean, it really was. I mean, it was really, really monochromatic, and it was really upper middle class. It's not anymore, but at the time it was the school to go to, and had the best academics, and people called us the Silkies because they thought we were, silk tie people, and it was very interesting. And the parking lot was like all muscle cars and, jacked up cars and VWs all painted up and everything. It was that time, in the life, but it ended pretty quickly.
I had lived in Evanston, Illinois before, so I had been in an integrated school system.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably a big part of why it wasn't.
Yeah. Wasn't as notable maybe for
you. It wasn't
yeah.
as a big a change for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, coming to Oklahoma, was there culture shock in any other ways, or was it? We
were in Oklahoma and moved away for 3 years when my dad went to seminary. So I had 3 years out.
Okay.
So, it was just kind of coming back. But I was really young when we left. So, but I hadn't spent my whole life in Oklahoma City like Dwight had done. So
in the same house.
Yeah, his family was in the same house even.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I moved around a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we can move on to getting to OSU. You kind of talked about what motivated you to come here, but I was wondering I don't know if you mentioned what brought you to OSU. Was there a family expectation or?
It's kind of interesting. My grandfather came here whenever he was, of age. He was a farming family out of Kingfisher, Oklahoma. And he literally sold a calf to have the money for the semester's worth, and then went to work along with a friend of his as a janitor for the Methodist Church so they could have room and board. But that only lasted about a semester, maybe two. And he ran out of money, and he preferred to lend the family's money to his brother to come here. So he sacrificed his degree and so his brother could come. So he was the first one in the family to go to OSU, and then my mother's brother, his son, came here and got a degree in engineering. And so I knew about the place because we'd come up here as little kids to homecoming and had visited my uncle and then watched the homecoming parade and all that. So I had that experience. And I think that's about it, I'm not sure I came back here in between. So when it got time to look around for colleges, I just had such little experience. Mm-hmm. It's kind of embarrassing, really. I knew about OU, but OSU was a school that my family members and any friends I knew had gone to. And so because they had a good architectural engineering program, that kind of sealed the deal. So I really didn't even apply hardly anyplace else.
Yeah.
And just came to OSU.
Mm-hmm. And so you're a year ahead of her, but so take you back 50 years, you get to campus, you get to Stillwater, and what was it like? What was the atmosphere? We're on campus now, so I know some of the changes you're reminded of, but so what was it like back then? Take me back to.
I'll just start because I'm the older one, and I'll let Mary's coming in after me a little bit, but it was a very interesting time because it was Vietnam War was still going on. And people were coming back from that disabused and wounded. So there was that dimension. Then there were so many people from tiny little towns with the FFA jackets and everything. So you had this whole farmer rancher thing going on. And then a good number of what I would call hippies, long-haired, people. And my roommate was one of those and so on. And so you had that dimension. The ecology movement was just really coming up. It started when we were in high school. I remember a whole group of people decided to go clean Theta Pond, which looking back, I thought all they're doing is taking the sludge out of the bottom. They're not helping anything, basically, for the planet, but it made them happy. And, there's all of that happening, going on. I think that was kind of the big picture. I forgot what else I was going to say about that. Once you hop in, I'll remember something.
To me, it felt like a small town. Mm-hmm. I mean, you just come to a small town. I didn't have a car. I had my bicycle, my Schwinn bicycle. And really, you didn't really need a car to go any place because it was just small enough. And if you knew somebody that could get you to the grocery store and downtown seemed like it was a big place to go. There really wasn't any place to go off of campus that you really needed to go. I mean, you could pretty much do everything.
Yeah.
What a difference it is today, just coming in town, we realized it's a big difference, all the new buildings, and every once in a while you get kind of confused as to where you are. But it really felt like a small town, and you ran across people that you knew just walking across campus. I mean, you were always going to see somebody that you knew, so.
I just remember it being kind of crazy in some ways in the dormitories because I lived in Murray Hall, which was one of the ones built in the 30s, no air conditioning, bathrooms down the hall, and one telephone on the floor, so that's what it was like. And I tell that to people now who are in college and young people, and they can't believe it. One telephone for the whole hall. And one of those old elevators, you have the door you shut, the door you shut behind that, so on. But I mean, they would do things like you wake up in the morning, there'd be a cow grazing in the living room because that's what the kids were doing, pranks. So it was a prankish kind of time. We were having fun, and there wasn't any kind of bad fun that I remember, but things like that happened a lot. Parties that weren't supposed to happen happened, things like that.
Streaking started whenever we were at
streak night, yeah.
I was in Drummond Hall, and I can remember my roommate and I were studying, and we started hearing this big roar. And we looked out the window, and there was this huge crowd of people. And they were stopping at all the dorms and saying, "Come out, come out." And it was a spring day, so everybody was going out and joining
today,
them.
it was just a beautiful day.
Yeah, it was gorgeous outside. So that was when streaking first started.
I was with her. We were studying in her room with her roommate, and then so I decided I better get back to my house, which was across campus on the other side. Down here where the parking lot is now, Hester, 424 South Hester. And I had a Corvair at the time, or a pretty light little car, a little baby blue Corvair. And I came down University Avenue right where the pond is, and that's where the group had come together right there. And a group further south had pushed the sirloin stockade bull all the way up to push it to Theta Pond. And 3 or 4 naked guys were on top of it, hooping and hollering. And they passed right in front of my car on their way to Theta Pond. I'm thinking, I'm in some trouble now. But I managed to kind of honk my horn and, move slowly through the crowd and get out of there before we got dumped in the pond. But yeah, it was just a build-up that time of a lot of cold weather followed by a lot of warm weather right through that whole week before spring break. And it was just like someone just cranked up the hormones and the energy and talent. Something had to happen. And it was all good fun. It was nothing bad. But,
and you were in Drummond, you said, right? So you're coming from Drummond to
yeah,
he went clear
the whole
across.
crowd. It was huge. It was just this movement across the campus. So. Pretty exciting. Then the next year, it happened again, but it was cold, and so it was kind of sad. People kind of hung around. A few people streaked, and it was like that much. So, I forgot about the streaking part. We had someone streak through the library when I was on the door crew, but we couldn't catch them. They ran through too fast. So, by the time I dialed the number for the guy across the way, old dial phones, that already got all the way through. So.
And when were you in the door crew?
I made my senior year, so it would have been 74, 75.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that there really wasn't a lot of reason to go off of campus when you were here. So everything you needed was kind of around, place to eat, place to go hang out. It was all kind of...
We hung out on campus.
Student Union was great. They had several places to eat in the Student Union. In addition to the cafeteria, there's an upstairs kind of you could order stuff there called the Starlight Room or something.
Starlight Terrace, maybe.
Yeah.
Starlight.
And once a week there would be amateur night there, and so we'd perform there. Friends of mine would perform there from time to time. And then there were always movies, like the one we saw our first date. There was always movies there. And then the Sarah Center was, open during that time, and there'd always be an Allied Arts program of some sort. So we used to tease about going to get culture points. I did because I didn't grow up very cultured. So I would go to a concert of the type of music I never heard before, and that was always enlightening.
Yeah.
Plus, you got points for humanities.
That's true.
If you went to different programs.
Yeah.
So.
Maybe extra credit or something.
You got extra credit.
Well, the campus ministries were all around the campus, and of course, fraternities and sororities are right there around campus. And Most of the dorms had their own cafeterias, and some of them, like the one I was in, had an after-hours kind of little soda place. So if you didn't have the weekend meals, you could go there and get a hamburger or something. So again, without a car, it was not a problem, really. So,
So tell me about your classes. You started off as an architecture major, and I know architecture has a reputation being a very intensive program.
Yes.
Was it like that at the time?
Yes, and I didn't get very far in it, but I could see, see the handwriting. And I was a good student in high school, and nothing was ever a problem. But boy, when I saw the math requirements for that engineering program, I thought, nah, this is going to get really tough real fast. There wasn't any drawing involved that first year, so there was just a lot of prep classes, I would call them. But it was really a lot of things came together that year for me. One was that I decided to apply as a conscientious objector for the Vietnam War, which was a big deal at the time, since people just didn't do that. And so it's, in fact, something I've hardly ever talked about because most people don't really want to hear that. But that was during that freshman year before I met Mary. And that was a part of my decision to change into philosophy and religion, is because it was a part of a whole personal upheaval around the issue of killing, and so on. So I was able, actually, strangely enough, to receive that out of the Oklahoma City, what do we call it? There's a name for that office.
Recruitment?
Anyway, something about selection. Because I didn't choose non-service, I chose non-combat service, so they allow you to do that, which would have been any number of possibilities, including actually going into be a medic or something like that. But, so that brought about a lot of soul searching, because the process to go through at the time, and I still have the files about that thick, letters from your parents, papers you've written, testimony by people who know you, all that kind of stuff had to go into the file to make sure you were simply trying to get out of it, So, and who knows? I mean, I was young and my number was low. I mean, back then they put your birth dates in a big bin and did this, and mine was like 50 something, So it was, and two of my real good friends had been inducted, which means just gone in for their checkup, and one got 4A and one got 4F because he had some sort of condition that got him out. But and then after all of that, then Richard Nixon just kind of called it quits at the end of that year. And so it was all over regardless of all that work. But the work I did in regard to that helped me solidify my thinking about kind of who I was and where I wanted to go. And the conversation I had with my engineering advisor was the most helpful. I don't remember his name, but I remember it very clearly. I went and talked to him nervous about getting out of engineering. And my parents were not happy about that. What are you going to do with a degree in philosophy? Well, I don't know. So I didn't know for sure at the time that I would go into ministry for sure or whatever. So I was talking to him about what I was doing and describing kind of how I felt. I'd become uncomfortable, is the best way to say it, in engineering. Not just the degree of the work, but something about that was not resonating with me.
Yeah.
And what he said was, he says, Dwight, what I think you're trying to say, he says, is we aren't your people. I thought, you're right. You aren't my people. My roommates who were engineers had muscle cars and they had giant stereos, and I'm riding a bike still. I have a little handheld tape recorder I'm listening to. I just was not that kind of techie, engineering type, and even architecturally so. But anyway, that's kind of what got me here and kept me here was we had a really wonderful group of faculty in the philosophy and religion department at the time, and really just great people. I enjoyed them very much, and came back to visit them for a number of years thereafter, and called on some of them on various times, and so it was really a wonderful department at the time.
Do you know what appealed, like how philosophy and religious studies appealed to you?
Oh, yeah. I can really say that because Mary, when we first were dating, the first several weeks of our dating, actually, I knew or thought I knew we were going to get married. And she laughed still, but I was pretty certain. And so she said, well, I'm if you're thinking about becoming a minister, it's certainly not going to be in the Methodist Church or some other church. It's going to be in the Episcopal Church, because she was not going to be anything but Episcopalian. And I'd never even been to the Episcopal Church. So she just made me promise I would go with her and go to some of the classes they had there. And the priest who was over here at St. Andrews is still a good friend of mine in his 90s. And he taught this class where he began by saying that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth and said it was all good, and he hasn't changed his mind. I thought, oh, I love that. It's all good, And then he went on to explain that in that church I could ask questions and I could disagree and I could argue with him or whatever. It would be okay. I thought, really? I could argue? Which is what philosophy was about. Philosophy is just about argument, basically, in the best sense of that word, And so I learned how to argue well and how to pursue ideas, and I love that. It was great. A real opening, a real breath of fresh air.
I could see that and compare it to a very rigid or defined way of doing something, like engineering, like very, rigid. In
it was like freedom. It really was,
Yeah.
In fact, we had an office for our department. I think it was, I don't know what building it is, it's gone now. Second floor, and someone had put in a room just like this, tables and chairs is all that was in it. And on the outside of the door it said, the Will Rogers Memorial Metaphysical Laboratory. I thought, that's great. We're going to go talk some metaphysics. So
that's funny.
Well, yours was about library. You were in library from the beginning, right?
Mm-hmm. I started out undecided because I thought, why declare a major and then switch? Because everything was set really the first 2 years. So I was in the College of Education and decided, I'd always wanted to be a school librarian. And OSU had the program, so I got in it immediately. And it was my cup of tea. Everything went great.
Yeah.
There were great professors then.
Do you remember I'm thinking about what a library science class today looks like. Can you remember some of the topics or what were some of the things you remember learning?
Cataloging was you typed every single card. Mm-hmm. And so for one book, that's quite a set of cards you had to type. And there were we weren't allowed to use whiteout or anything on the cards. You had to have them all perfect when you turned them in. So that was Ann Hoyt that taught that class. Mm-hmm. And probably the AV class would be the most different now because you made film strips. Mm-hmm. So you'd get a book and make a film strip of it.
It's like microfilm?
Just on 35 millimeter. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so, wow, could you imagine that now? Mm.
Well, you had some feminist teachers at the time, which I thought for OSU in the library science program was pretty amazing. And Dr. McCorkle and others who just really instilled in these librarians the importance of making information available and trying to work against some of the norms in the society which appear in library books and so on. I shouldn't talk
at that time. It was really about
women's movement,
and the women's movement that was really big at that time, and being inclusive. And I remember one time I used the word tomboy in a paper, and boy, it had big red marks all over it when I got it back. So we really learned a lot about being inclusive with everybody and not censorship. So things are really different now, but. I would say, and Carolyn Croft was our children's librarian, did the children's literature class, and it was very, very good. Mm-hmm. And then Ann Hoyt taught some of the other classes. So there was a club, Beta Alpha was the. Is that even still a thing anymore?
I'm not sure. I don't know if we have a library. Library science now has become more of like a master's program to pursue, and I think OU is the one in state that offers it.
It is. You're exactly right.
So I don't know.
This was just for school librarianship at the time, and it was the only program like that in the state. So.
And when you talk about some of the inclusive practices, what are some examples of what was the kind of practice that you would do that was focused on?
To make sure that your collection had things that were appropriate for all races,
Mm-hmm.
and that women weren't demeaned and children weren't demeaned,
Yeah.
and this being pretty open as to what you had in your collection.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. And you mentioned during this time you were working in the library too. At some point you started working for Anne. Can you talk about just the library at the time? You mentioned some of the different floors, maybe like differences from today.
Well, it's a lot different than coming in today, that's for sure. The fourth floor had pretty much all the education. It was pretty much 300s, 370s was pretty much on the fourth floor. And each floor had its own circulation desk. So if you wanted to check out books, you went to that circulation desk to check them out, and you had to sign the cards and then file them. And then when they came in, you had to find that appropriate card to go back in the book. So it was a pretty lengthy check-in, check-out process, and then of course shelving them again. So fourth floor would be education. Fifth floor had documents on it, and the curriculum materials lab was in the corner. After I graduated, I worked in the reserve room, which was on the first floor, and that's where I don't even know if they do it anymore. Excuse me. Professors that wanted to have things read during their class, because everybody would want them, they would put them in the reserve room, so you would go in there to check them out.
They probably put them online now, I imagine.
Yeah,
They're probably online.
there's some course reserves, especially like there's textbooks I know will have you can come. You maybe can't check them out, but you can go in. So it's like, especially if it's an expensive one, so there's access to it. So maybe it's some version of it today.
Similar.
Probably, yeah. So
It was a pretty busy place at the time.
Oh, yeah.
Magazine articles, I mean, they would be available online now, but they wouldn't have been then. So
yeah, so it's all card catalogs then.
all
Yeah.
card catalogs,
And the Reader's
looking them
Guide.
up.
The Reader's Guide to periodical literature.
Yes. And I can remember when our son started college, he said there were students at the card catalog that didn't know how to use the card catalog. And at that time they were, they still had both. I mean, you could go and check out through the circulation on the first floor then. It was all centralized.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
We still have some lingering catalogs.
Oh, you do?
Not really, I think, for use, but just as kind of relics.
Just as they're there.
Yeah, maybe we'll find them on the way
Oh,
out.
yeah.
There was a little eyebrow window on the fourth floor. It may still be there that overlooks the campus.
Yeah.
And so she'd be working on the fourth floor when we were dating, and I would go find a comfy chair from the eyebrow window, because as a philosophy major, I mainly just read. I mean, you wrote some papers, but mainly you just read constantly. And so I had to sit there and read the whole time she was there. So it was kind of like it was a date, but at least I could see her. I guess, well, there she is. I'm still reading.
I actually changed 2 different libraries over, elementary libraries over to centralized circulation, computerized. I can remember the feeling of throwing the card catalog away and how upset some teachers were when they came back and found out the card catalog was gone, They didn't want to use the computer. They wanted the card catalog.
Yeah, it was slow to get buy-in, it sounds like.
We just dumped it.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, we're just going all the way here.
Yeah.
We're just going to dump it, which was hard to do.
Yeah, especially for you, learning like this is the way, having that experience, and then be like, okay, we're transitioning to an entirely new way of access. Yeah, that's got to go against maybe what you feel is like, no, this is the right way.
And you labor all that time putting the cards in order, and then you're just going to dump them in the trash. But yeah, I did it with 2 different schools.
Wow. And do you remember any other library employees or the dean at the time, or anyone else that maybe stands out to you?
Well, it was the College of Education, so it would have been the dean of the College of Education. So it was part of that.
Yeah.
Farland? Can't remember.
I don't remember either.
And you mentioned being a conscientious objector. Were there any kind of student movements, like protest movements against the war at the time, or maybe I'm thinking about maybe civil rights activism that maybe still was going on campus?
Now, I'm going to characterize this to the best of my knowledge. I may not be accurate here, but I would say because I was working with the university at the time and had friends who were working at the University of Oklahoma and have moved to Norman, and we've lived there for the past 19 years now, I would say that was one of the differences between the two places, is that while there were students who felt strongly in many ways on both campuses, I didn't hardly ever see anything happen here. Not a single protest, unless there may have been a sign or two or something, or a reaction to something in the news that would happen briefly, but there was almost nothing.
You would think there would have been, but I don't remember it either.
But there were lots of them in Norman, and the National Guard almost got called out there one time and everything, so it was really touch and go there. But here, not so much, and I don't know exactly why, except I do think that there was a sense at which I felt a kind of deep respect people had for each other that I think I hope it's present still here, but it's not present in the country. But I think that kind of, having a strong feeling but not trying to throw that in someone's face. The only people who were on the corners were the preachers, right? There'd always be someone on the corner with a Bible or something proclaiming the end of the world or something, But yeah, that was about it.
Yeah.
You don't remember any protests, do you?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
Well, what are some of the clubs or organizations you were involved with? I think, were you in sororities, fraternities, or?
No sororities. For me, I was just pretty much active in the library science club.
Yeah, I would describe us as both of us as studious and kind of boring. I think I had my first drink when I was a senior, I think, something like that. I had gone out with some library people to have a drink, and strangely enough, door crew, so I studied a lot, and I was in that singing group, as I mentioned, and I worked, and Mary worked too. And so between work and study, and then we both were very much involved in the church. And so that was probably our big thing. Outside my singing group, it was church. And not church just Sunday morning. It was like we taught Sunday school, and our house, after we got married and had a little house north of campus, our house was like the gathering place for all the college age and younger, the people who were our age and younger. So we were like 22 at the time. So we got married at 21, believe it or not. And so we had the 17, 18, 19-year-olds at our house watching Saturday Night Live, which had just come out during that time. And so they come over Saturday night, and we hideaway pizza, Saturday Night Live, and then we just, would do picnics and run down the river, things like that. We had a favorite spot at Ripley where we used to go have picnics. And so it was pretty dull, really, kind of.
And I'm sure working a lot too to get more of your time.
It does.
Well, we were both able, with just a little bit of help, to be able to finish college without hardly any debt whatsoever, which was a big deal.
And you've mentioned it a couple of times. Do you want to talk about the singing group you were a part of?
Well, yeah, it's kind of, it connects to some other topics, but in addition to being with high school and college relations, that freshman year, I just fell in with some people who were musical, just literally out on the lawn, and then we decided we'd find a piano over here at the student union, so someone played it, and we started singing along, and it turned out that several of us could sing, and I said, well, I can play guitar too, and so it just morphed into a handful of us that kind of thought that would be fun. And then there was an announcement here at the student union that there was a tryout for OSU student entertainers, which we didn't know anything about. But it was a tryout, so we thought, we'll go try out. So the three of us who were interested at that time tried out individually, a pianist, a vocalist, and me on guitar and vocal. And afterwards, the guy who was behind it at the time, Ashley Alexander, came to us and said, well, individually, I'm not going to have you come work for you. But if you put a group together, I'd be interested in that. So he said, but I want you to take on another guy I know as in the group, because he was a senior, and we were all freshmen. So he felt like that this senior could lend a little bit of stability to the group, which I think he was right about. So anyway, four of us started a group which we named Resurrection, and we did folk, Christian, contemporary Christian, and some pop, and that was basically what we did.
So a lot of cover songs. And
all covers. We didn't write anything. And it was just, kind of basic cover stuff. And by today's standards, it would probably be pretty mediocre. But it was pretty fun for us. And we made a few dollars at it. I mean, we'd go to high schools and churches and small university and college events and get a few dollars for performing.
Banquets. You used to do banquets.
So the student entertainers, it was a whole program where he kind of had this. Yeah. He would help you find performances to do concerts and gigs, I guess.
Yeah. So he had a whole. I have a brochure actually. Had a whole. Stable, so to speak, of people. A marimba player, a ventriloquist, some people who did great harmonies on gospel songs. And so, some of it to my 1970s view was kind of old, kind of like Lawrence Welk stuff, right? And we weren't that great ourselves, but we were a little more on the modern side. But yeah, it was a whole office dedicated to that. And then when we were brought on board, the deal was that we could schedule ourselves. And so he gave me keys to the office and the long distance lines back then you had to have and all that. So I basically scheduled this. And then the student entertainers kind of took a cut, to help fund the office kind of thing, kind of like a promoter would. Yeah. So,
and did you record?
Yeah. So
I see a record here. I thought we'd.
Yeah, I don't know. You want me? This is one record that my daughter had that she found in her collection because she took all my albums because I can't play these anymore. I have nothing to play them on. And then I made this CD of our group at a performance where Mary had my little tape recorder and she recorded it. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I had it transferred to a CD, so the quality's not great. But yeah, this is. The old brochure from back then. So it has a picture of us here and the student entertainers and everything.
Oh, that's great.
Kind of fun. Yeah.
So did you record this on campus then? Was it?
This is a performance that was at a banquet. This is banquet.
Okay. So and what about the?
Oh, this is a story. Yeah.
Yeah, that was in Dallas. They got to go to Dallas.
There's another one. We're on number 5 or number 3. There's one side or the other of this one. We're also 2 cuts on this and 2 cuts on the other. I was just in class one day, my freshman year. Yeah, it was still freshman year.
Yeah,
because Jesse was still in it. And one of my pianists came up and knocked on the door of my classroom as I came out and said, "Quick, grab your guitar, get a coat, let's go. Where are we going? We're going to Dallas. Why are we going to Dallas?" We have a recording time at a studio. So back then, recording times were hard to find at studios because there weren't many studios around. Actually, Alexander set it up, and so he sent us down there. And so we arrive and just breathless and barely in time for this, late evening recording. They tune up our guitars, stick us in front of microphones, and say go. And so we did 4 numbers, and they took all 4 first time around and put them on the album. So we were pretty excited about it. I was terrified because I'd been faking my vocals and faking my guitar. In public performances, it's hard to tell. But when they put a microphone up this close to your mouth, you know when you're faking. So they were able to kind of adjust the volumes and make it all sound really pretty great. So yeah. So this has other groups on it too from student entertainers at the time.
Okay. So not just OSU or
it's all OSU.
It's all OSU. Okay.
But not just our group. Yeah. So
and that was that your freshman year too?
Yeah, it's my freshman year.
You did a lot that first year.
The first year was really that was a very formative year for me. And I met Mary the next year, and the formation continued. The group continued the next year too, with Mary coming along with to join us in the car, and she didn't sing in the group.
Not singing.
But we changed the 4th member. Jesse was a veterinarian student, so he went off to work, and we picked up Gary Leffler, who I mentioned to you, I think, on the phone, who became the 4th member of the group. And he continued to sing with us for that whole year then. So, yeah.
And I was wondering, I know Ashley Alexander, I said that right. He, I think, was on campus a long time. He was kind of a staple here, and I think back in Marshall too. I think he
Yes.
And so I was wondering if you could just describe what he was like.
He was a character. I mean, I understood that. I thought that he was also a horn player at one time, but I don't know if that's true or not. But he was a very eclectic human being. He was old when I thought he was old when we knew him. But he had a younger girlfriend, and he was super active. Everything was enthusiastic. I mean, he was just always everything's happening great. It's going to be wonderful, so positive and so enthusiastic. And he just drew all of this types of entertainment. Like I said, it was just all a big variety. So I think he was a song and dance man, basically, kind of a variety show guy. I think he would have been great in vaudeville or something because he did, that's a great act, a tap dancer, great, come on in, So it was just enthusiasm overflowing with this guy, and he just attracted a lot of entertainers to him. And I always was puzzled why we would have that, and I'm not even sure why they did and still do, but it was fun. So
yeah, that's interesting. Well, are there any other memories of your time as a student you want to share before we move to the festival specifically? We'll probably go back after too, but anything else you can think of to share?
You were in leadership council your freshman year.
Yeah, that's what got me into the high school and college relations. Yeah. I think that the other piece of the thing that was very interesting that talk about formative took place then after I'd been working on my master's for a while, after we'd been married and living here and our son was born, somewhere in that category. I was going to a church meeting with my priest, and we're driving in his car together. And I was trying to make my mind up at the time about whether I wanted to go on and teach philosophy at a small college someplace or get my doctorate somewhere else, or, Mary was working at the library, so we had these options we could go into, and we'd applied at several jobs to be campus and conference directors or something, and that didn't work out. So my priest said, well, he's been looking for an assistant for some time, and would I come to work as a layperson, not as a priest, but as a layperson, come to work in a job that a priest would normally have at the church down the street here. And I said, well, that'd be great. Let me think about that, pray about that, and see. It's kind of a dream come true, really. That same week, Russell Conway comes to me. He says, well, Jerry Gill's going to go work for the Foundational Alumni Association, I guess it was. He said, in his job, which is the one I'd been wanting for years, but Jerry didn't seem to be going anywhere, right? He was working on his doctorate and so on. He says, it's available, and this would be something to be perfect for you since you've been with me all this time and everything. I thought, that's great. Well, back in the day, now nothing paid very much, but the church paid about $10,000 less than the high school and college relations did, which wasn't a lot either. And so we had a really difficult decision to make. Mm-hmm. And we knew at the time, and has turned out to be true, that was the fork in the road. That one way or another, our lives are going to be determined to some extent by what we decided. And so I decided to go to work for the church, and that's where we were then ever since.
And was that what years? Late 70s?
That would have been late 70s, because I quit working for high school and college relations in the end of spring of 79, and my son was born in 78. Yeah.
Okay. And I thought that was interesting because you still got a master's in higher education.
I stayed on and got a master's in higher education.
I was wondering, kind of in your timeline, how those things lined up. What made you decide? Because to me, in my mind, that degree maybe was getting more common at the time, but it still seems like maybe it was uncommon to pursue unless you had a mind that you were going to be on the university.
Yeah. So I started it off, in the early, mid to late 70s, and it took me 6 years to get it because I was doing a course here and a course there.
You were working full time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I just did it evenings and so on. And in fact, I wouldn't have even known I was that close to finish it, but my advisor again, Tom Carmen, just called me up and says, hey, you're almost ready to finish. You want to work on a thesis so we get this thing done? So, but I moved to Tulsa for another job while I was still working on that. So actually I was commuting from Tulsa when I finally got the degree in 83. I've been there for about a year and a half or something like that, working for a private school as a teacher and chaplain. So that was very interesting. I think it was mainly just my determination to get that higher degree, I think, because none of my family had ever had anything beyond a bachelor's, and only one member of my family had a bachelor's. I mean, on my whole side of the family.
Yeah.
And so to me, that was a huge deal, and so I just had to get that, just had to finish it. And I also thought that if two things, that would have still been a fallback position if I ever wanted to get back into university. That would have been a great way to do that.
Yeah.
And I've known several people who've done that here. And the other thing was, it has turned out that education served me very well as a priest in the church. Curriculum development, administration, budgeting, personnel, all that kind of stuff that was part of that degree program was directly transferable.
Yeah, I have a question to ask you about that once we get
Okay.
we caught up in the timeline.
Okay.
But I wanted to ask. Did you have something to say? I'm sorry.
No, I'm good.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe it's time to talk a little bit more specifically about the music festival.
Yeah.
So I know that's how we initially got connected.
Yes.
And so I think it was spring of 1972. I think in April there was this big music festival that came to town. Lots of big names in country and bluegrass and folk. And so I thought, kind of how did you find out about it?
Yeah. Well, Mary wasn't here at the time. We had not met yet, and I know you're trying to get me to quit moving my chair, aren't you? She's got her hand on.
It's like, don't move.
Don't move the chair. At that time, our group still had Jess, but we were getting on board another guy named, whose name I mentioned, Gary Leffler. And he was friends with one of my other friends, and he eventually wound up in the group, but he hadn't even started playing anything yet. He didn't play anything. But he was interested in this type of music. I told him there was going to be this festival here, which I guess I found out through the OOHRP or announcements on campus. And of all the people that were in my little circle at the time, it was just him who was interested in going with me. So we went. It was in Gallagher Hall, if I remember right. In the
parts of it, I think, took place.
Field house. Yeah. The big parts were. So they had, I don't remember if it was 2 nights or not, but there were several different times we had big groups. It may have been the same day at different times or something. The big names, right, were on the stage. Doc Watson and, people like that.
Bill Monroe,
God, great ones. And so we were just out there listening to that, and that was fantastic. And I remember that I was taken by bluegrass because I had a country western. Thank you.
That's kind of the set list each day. Nice. If some of those help trigger you.
Yeah. The physical science or classroom building. Speedy West. I remember that. Earl Scruggs. Yes. Bill Monroe. Sam McGee. Elizabeth Cotton. Yeah, so I think I must have missed the Thursday one. But for Saturday, afternoon and Saturday night, I was definitely there for both of those. And I grew up with a family where we were all into country western, but that was like the Tammy Wynette, Porter Wagoner type of country, and then I got into personally Glenn Campbell and things like that, and also a lot of folk music, Bob Dylan and that kind of thing. But I guess I knew somehow that bluegrass had something to do with that. But when I started hearing some of these talks and hearing some of the music, I was able to make those connections between the sounds I was hearing, in both the folk and the country that was coming from this bluegrass background. So that kind of idea of connections between different types of styles really got to me. And then it was Gary's enthusiasm, which you can hear on the tapes I made. He just went nuts. He loved it. This guy from Long Island, New York, just had never heard any of this. And he was just going crazy. And soon after that, I loaned him a banjo, which he picked up and started playing in no time. And then he eventually got himself a guitar and played guitar and then joined our group the following fall. But so it was really exciting. I remember there were lots of faculty, other adults, and so on. So it wasn't just a student group. It was the congregation audience was full of a variety of people. And I could sense and see in some people that they knew these people and they knew these numbers. And I was going, I should learn more about this.
Did any of the names stand out to you?
Bill Monroe, yeah.
Okay, that was one that was familiar.
Pete Seeger, Bill Monroe, all those kind of things. Speedy Watson, I remember those. Yeah, so the Elizabeth Cotton was the one that got us together online, and that was the one I remember the most because I remember sitting down the floor of this classroom building, and she was up against the window, sitting cross-legged in an old dress, and with her guitar. And I guess I didn't remember, although I know now and looking back and reading some things that she plays it backwards, right? She plays it
upside down
backwards, which I guess at the time I didn't remember. But she just sat there and talked about her life and talked about learning how to play guitar. And what I don't remember, which is interesting, is that the big number that people talk about was Freight Train, that she's well known for. And she may have played that, may not, but it didn't strike me at the time because my lack of knowledge of the genre at the time meant that didn't stand out to me as being a big thing. But what she did play was 500 Miles, which is a song I knew and played all the time. So to me, that was the big thing. She's playing 500 Miles, which in my memory, she said she wrote. But I wouldn't stand on that because it's been 50 years ago. But I think she said other people say they did, but I did. So I don't know about that. But I was very impressed because for her, it was her background, you know. That was so amazing. And the sponsorship she received from the family that helped her.
The Seeger family, I think.
Develop that. Yeah, the Seeger family, that helped her develop that. But also, again, about in the history of the genre, she began to give me some other feel for where this music comes from and the kind of people that brought it along to us and everything. And I've never really pursued bluegrass. I've been just kind of a musical hack. Pretty much, I still just do popular stuff. I've just written a couple things, and lately I haven't picked up guitar hardly at all. But and I wound up playing it mainly to lead music for churches and so on. But I did at one point was able to get into several books that described the whole process of the guitar itself and how it developed, and then how bluegrass music coming through the Appalachians and into Oklahoma, Texas, and so on becomes all kinds of music, from Western swing to country western to whatever. So.
Yeah. Did you have any sense of Western swing or anything at the time? Was that familiar to you?
Yeah, Western swing was very familiar to me, and that was a part that I was cluing into on this because my parents listened to Western swing.
Like Bob Wills.
I still have Bob Wills albums. Yeah, so.
And I know his brother was there, so that's where. Yeah. And one of the parts you'll hear, Mike Seeger was the MC for the evening.
I remember that. I remember the Seeger, but I thought it was Pete at the time, but it was Mike.
Yeah, it was Mike, and he talks about how on this occasion it was one of the first times where Western swing kind of got to be brought into like the folk scene where you have these folk and bluegrass and country, and so he kind of talks about the importance of Oklahoma gets overlooked, and so that was something you kind of talked about, the exposure, and it kind of connects to what he was talking about too.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's the educational value of it, and I think that certainly for my friend who wound up playing guitar and banjo his whole life, that was a big piece of his development and his education, was just being able to see how rich this whole thing really was, you know. And in Oklahoma, I mean, you know, people sometimes back in the day would refer to people in Oklahoma and Arkansas as hillbillies, and country music was hillbilly music, you know, and kind of denigrate that. But this kind of gave it it's the academic institution that's sponsoring this. These people are from all over who came here, and they're looking at it from a more academic standpoint. I thought it was great. It was helpful.
Do you remember, or are you aware of any of the people who helped organize it, or how did it come to be? Or?
That's a really good question. And I being just a second semester freshman and just on the receiving end of it. But there had to be a pretty big sponsoring group, and
I think Allied Arts was involved from what I've seen, but I wasn't sure with your.
I would think Allied Arts would be the primary one, I would suppose, but unless you turn up some brochures, it would say so. I don't. know.
Okay. Yeah. And you mentioned the crowd. Was it a turnout? Did it attract more than just locals, or was it kind of?
Well, I would say there were people there from Tulsa and Oklahoma City had come, and because it was clear that there was a pretty good mature group as well as a student group, and I think that there were a number of students who, like my friend, were able to come to appreciate again how this connected to their music, whether it was rock and roll or something else, because this was Doobie Brothers time and all that kind of stuff. So people were really making the connections with the guitar work that was going on, because there were so many connections there.
Yeah. And I had this question to ask: what was the music scene like on campus or around town? You talked about all these other genres going on. What were kind of the popular ones? Sounds like at least you had your own crowd, but were there?
I'm sure there were bands that were playing on the strip, as we call it, on Washington Street, at various different bars and so on. I didn't go, and so I wouldn't know about that. So our little enclave was kind of different. I don't know. What would you say? We didn't go. Willie Nelson
Yeah.
came. Willie Nelson came and played in the, and we went to that. It was after our son was born, so it was probably later in the 70s. And he came and played the field house. And that was a big thing. But and we are big Willie Nelson fans, obviously. But yeah, I think those things were happening kind of outside of our circle.
Yeah. And you mentioned already you have these tapes that you recorded. What do you remember why you thought, let me bring my cassette recorder to
my little sorry cheap cassette recorder? I wanted to do two things. I wanted to listen to it again myself some, later on, which I did do for a number of years before I began to realize these tapes will probably crack and break. I'll keep doing this. And the other thing really was, and this may sound strange, and today makes an interesting addendum to this, I felt like they'd be important. And that's why I still have them. I kept thinking, well, I recorded these. I thought this would be cool to have. And then the longer many years passed, and it could be 30 years and 40 years, and I thought, I better hang on to these because they might be important sometime. And so when I heard from you, I couldn't believe it that somebody might actually be around who cared about that event still, And, so it was probably the main thing, this thing I'd preserve something because it was pretty cool. And I figured these people wouldn't be around forever. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of the performers passed away within the decade too.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the class, so being in the room with Elizabeth Cotton, there were kind of these workshops or classes that were broken off. Do you remember why you chose that one, or was it advertised as like a songwriting workshop? Or
That's a good question. I think it was more of a songwriting workshop because I think she was describing the process of writing songs and what she had written and so forth, and talking about tunes and chords versus lyrics and that kind of thing. And also talking about how some of these things were songs that had been around and this were reshaped and reformed, by various different artists and folk singers especially. So that probably was what attracted me to it. And I must have seen her or heard about her from the stage maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I remember picking that and was like, this would be really cool to sit with her. And there wasn't that many of us there. From my memory, there was maybe a dozen of us, but maybe she did a bunch of these.
I think there were 2 days. And on the program, I think it said Mike Seeger was going to be there too. Do you remember? It was just her?
In the room with me, it was just her.
Okay. And do you remember talking about her creative process? It's a big ask to think 50 years from now.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I got the sense that for her, it was rhythm and tune, and rhythm and chord and tune that were the primary aspects of the song. Because in many cases, the words she was drawing from would have been ancient. And also those words sometimes, especially like 500 Miles and there's other songs of that nature, that are just in the culture, in the group of people. And I was just thinking one the other day, this is one of my favorite ones to sing to our granddaughter. Anyway, there is a ship and it sails the sea. That one has all these different verses, and it depends on which artist you listen to. So James Taylor sings it one way, and the Brothers Four sing it a different way, and Kingston Trio a different way, with all these different words. So what I remember from her was talking about that aspect of the fact that that she was interested in tune and so on, but the words could be different. Words could fit this particular thing.
Yeah. And I know there were some guest speakers that were there that you wouldn't have any idea who they were, but some of the other classes like Archie Green or Ralph Linzer, if those names meant anything to you, they were folklorists nationally recognized, and I think they taught classes too. So I was just curious if any of your friend or anyone else attended any others. Okay.
I did reach out to my friends who were in my singing group. My friend who was there with me has died a couple of years ago, so I wasn't able to talk to him. But the other ones, I mentioned this interview to them and what we'll be talking about. None of them had any memory of it. So I'm guessing not only did they not go, they just didn't think about it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, are there any other memories you can think of the event that are worth sharing? So maybe because the concert itself, maybe, are there any memories that stand out? Or
I do remember that although there were individual performances, there were also opportunities for them to play collectively with one another and kind of jam sessions. And those were pretty exciting to see them kind of play off of each other and so on, the different artists. And but that's about as far as I can remember there. But the guitars and the banjos together and so on, and listening to them really just riff and then seem to really enjoy themselves, which is the thing that I enjoyed the most about what we were doing in our group, was just simply we enjoyed playing and being together, and you could tell this was the kind of music that people could sit around and play all night, and probably did. They probably went home and played some more, when we were gone, because they simply enjoyed it. I remember a scene from a movie with Sally Field, and again, I can't think of the name of the movie, Places of the Heart. And there's a scene where there's a country dance, and they clear all the furniture out of this old house in the middle of nowhere, and people come and bring their moonshine, and they have a big dance. This little, Texas kind of Bill Willis type band comes, just a guitar and maybe a bass or something, and they play all night. And then they get in the car and they're driving home, and the guitar player vocalist is in the back seat of the car singing on the way home. And I thought, this is what is so wonderful about the music, is that it's just enjoyable and people just want to sing. And I remember our group one time went to the Panhandle for a 2-day thing, and the last performance was a school, last hour of school. So we're coming home all the way to Stillwater in this little tiny Mustang, 1967 Mustang, 4 of us with suitcases and 2 guitars, and we sang all the way home. Some of the same stuff we'd been singing and other things. And I thought, well, this is the music, right? And that's what impressed me so much when they started jamming. I thought, these people just enjoy this.
Yeah. The music never was the focal point. It sounds like this is what I want to pursue. This was more like an outlet or fun.
This is a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think maybe we can transition to, you talked about, so what year did you graduate?
I graduated 75.
75, and then you graduated the year
76.
after? Okay. And then you got married, it sounds like shortly there, or maybe
we got married a week after my graduation.
Okay, so you were still in school. Okay.
I had a senior year left.
Yeah. And you said you lived on the north side of campus, and what is probably now?
Well, we first started off with our first year of marriage. We lived right across from the hospital on Stanley, 525 Stanley or something like that. We just drove by it on the way here, and then that was a little house we rented, and then we moved north of campus, and we could get to the library easy from there to a little apartment complex on Washington, Washington Square Apartments. And then the year after that, we bought a house, which was amazing to think about, that we were that young when we bought a house. We bought a house on Knapp Street, which was a really great little location. We loved the house and lived there 6 years in it. Just thought it was great. It was an idyllic life, really, when we were living there. The students that came over, and literally being able to go to campus together every day and back. And we had friends and neighbors, church friends who lived on the same street. It was just really, really wonderful.
Great. And I know you've talked about, so you worked through the library kind of throughout that time. You worked with the high school college relations also. Were there any changes in your work? You said you ended up doing the reserve room after graduation. Like that's what you did throughout the 70s. And then did your role change over the years after graduation and take on?
Well, the office changed, and so did my role. Russell Conway was real good about adapting, and one of the things that he would do that I don't think you can do now is that he would create jobs for people. And that's one of the things I've always told people about myself. I inherited that or learned it from Russell, is that when you find good people, keep them if you can. And if that means evolving a job so they can continue to grow, do it. So he did that for me. So when I went full time, my role changed, and so I had greater responsibilities. And so during that time, we moved our office from Whitehurst Hall, where we were just down the hall from admissions, to the student union. And it wasn't over here; it was down at the south end. And it was kind of a small office suite, and it was dull and awful. And so he said, "Dwight, would you be able to help me decorate this?" I said, "Sure." Being overconfident. Right, as I always have been. I said, "Yeah, I can do that." So, I did that, and then helped us move over there and get the office suite decorated and everything. And then we got placed from being with admissions underneath the president to being underneath a vice president. I think maybe Russell Jerry may have talked about that. Dick Poole at the time, and I forget what the name of the department, what it was anyway. And that changed things, as he was a very different style of administrator than Dr. Calm had been, and much less open to change, and much less. He was more of a micromanager, in that way. And so I remember when Russell would be on vacation and I'd have more responsibility, I'd have to deal directly with the VP, and how scary that was, because he was the kind of guy that would literally throw you out of the office if he didn't like what you brought him, things like that. So that would be interesting. But it was a growth thing. To understand you come prepared. You double check and double check and double check until you have the right product. And there was a little more interest during that time. You mentioned integration that was taking place when we were in high school. That translates to affirmative action in college. And so affirmative action office was very interested in what we did. And so we went from just making basic records of a visit to making extensive records of visits. And that was also my purview, as well as giving these sheets of paper to each representing for each visit, how many students of what sex, of what race, and so on, and then to compile those into a report at the end of the year. And those were mainly to make sure we were making appropriate efforts in all the different markets out there. And that was going on at the same time that we got the speed limit reduced to 55 miles an hour, So you're having to make more visits with less money and a speed limit that's crunching. So when you're looking at how do you get to 3 schools in one day from Stillwater or all the way out to southwestern Oklahoma or southeastern Oklahoma, it got to be harder. So I think there was a little bit more pressure on what we were doing than there was in the early years. And then there was also just a lot of marketing in terms of how we could. Do we really need to see all these schools? Is it being cost effective? Because there was a philosophy that said that what we're doing is a service to counselors and principals for the sake of the whole state of Oklahoma, and whether we get students from these schools or not is not so important as the fact that we promote higher education wherever we go. Because at that time, not all the college and universities were doing this. And then it became more of a competition, to make sure we got enough students or maybe more students. And I remember feeling that competition real strongly with the University of Oklahoma, where I had friends who were recruiters, And then we got much more interested in junior colleges, because as we produce the, what's it called, the catalog, which has all the degrees in it.
Course catalog.
Thank you. That listed all the requirements for all the degrees. What that meant was that there was an implied contract with the student that you take these courses, you get this degree. Well, that means that the transfer student knows exactly what they need to take at their junior college and then or what they're going to get at OSU, which made that transfer so much easier. Part of that was you negotiated with the registrar. I mean, you just had to say, well, here's what I've got, and they got to kind of, well, yes or no. So this, which happened during the 70s as well, was a huge thing, because it enabled us to be able to say, okay, we can go into Tarrant Junior College down in Texas, or we can go over here to Tulsa Junior College or whatever and say, okay, here's what you can do from where you are. So we shifted to junior colleges more during that time. We started having a little bigger budget, so we had more full-time recruiters. So we did a lot fewer of the student people like I was, which was probably a good thing. But yeah, we had a better, more professional staff. And so I think a lot was going on there. The part about it that I most remember that I thought was, for me, fun, and I think which made the office so beneficial, it was one of the few offices on the whole campus that knew everybody everywhere, because we had to. So when you're touring a family around, you're trying to solve a problem of some sort, and we had a lot of people who came back to us if they had a problem. Because we're who they knew, right? That's who came to their high school. That's who they met when they enrolled, and so on. So you had to know people in financial aid. You had to know all the deans and all the academic advisors of all the departments, housing people, admissions people, registrar, and so on. And that to me was a blast, just to be able to have those connections.
It seems like it takes certain personalities who would do better in those situations, and you were well suited for it.
Well, and then my boss, again, Russell, I give him a lot of credit. He would talk to other vice presidents and other department heads about the importance of people friendliness, which is also Dr. Kalm's big thing. And Bob Kalm just drilled that into us. And he was a people person. But, if you're working someplace because your spouse is going to school here, it may not be the most fun. And it may not be the job that you dreamed of having, but it's just the one you got and you need to have. That's great, but don't take it out on the student who's trying to come and get their financial aid straightened out, who's trying to get their housing straightened out. So, we had to work a lot with people that way, sometimes face-to-face, real politely and carefully, and sometimes working around to the boss and so on to say, people's impression of Oklahoma State University isn't the recruiter alone. It's whoever they come into contact with the whole day they're here on campus or on the phone with later on. So it was that type of effort that we were really trying to get that point across, that to be a welcoming campus, you have to be a really welcoming campus. This can't be a PR deal. It has to be real. So.
And this kind of ties into going back to your graduate program, and kind of talking about with your library science program, how it incorporated some of the changing, whether it was responding to movements, like you talked about feminism or different things. Did your program react to or incorporate some, when we talk about affirmative action on campus and things, like was your program kind of dealing with those issues as you took those classes?
Yes.
And I was just curious if you could talk about what that program looked like, what was in the same question here, like what the focus was, kind of, what did it talk about?
So when we began, Jim talked the high school college relations, or the.
I'm talking about your higher education degree. I'm sorry.
No, they did.
Okay, so it wasn't quite.
No, it was interesting.
Yet.
That did not really touch that program at the time, which was very interesting. And what made it even more interesting was some of the classes I was taking evening classes with school superintendents from all over the state. And when we get to things like educational philosophy or curriculum development or things like that, they just simply were not interested. They kind of sat in the back row and kind of tuned out because they were here to get their degree for their additional pay raise or whatever, Not all of them, but a good number of them were that way. And I thought, and so I guess the most creative class, besides the one that was taught by my advisor in curriculum development, which was wonderful, but not relating to the issue you're talking about, was taught by the president of, at that time, Claremore Junior College. Who?
Do you remember who that was?
His first name was Richard.
That's okay.
He was taking the place of another professor who was on sabbatical, so they got him to come over here. He was teaching the junior college, right? And it was awesome. But what he told us about wasn't so much about the affirmative action issue, it was about the issue of evaluations of teachers. And so it was a beginning of student evaluations. And so he really opened up our minds about that whole issue of what it means to evaluate a teacher on the basis of what, how much weight do you give to student evaluations versus whatever. And also the whole thing in junior college at the time, which is, I know, a big deal all over in education now, is the whole idea of employing a lot of people who aren't full professors, who you can pay less and not give benefits to and so on, to get less expensive time in front of a student. And so that was just kind of starting at that time too. And so he just opened our eyes up about that. But I don't remember in my classes anything that was directly related to affirmative action or to cultural adaptation.
I was just thinking because you were working full time kind of in higher education, so seeing trends and what it was looking like in practice versus what you were learning, it sounds like maybe there's some disconnect.
The coursework was lagging behind a bit, I think. Now, I'm pretty sure that later on, this was probably more in Mary's area than mine, they started talking more about how testing itself was skewed toward, upper middle class white people in terms of just the language that was being used. Which we talked about that, I remember years ago. It was from your class or my class. But, and that may have been in testing and measurements. So they may have touched on that in my test and measurements class a little bit. Because I remember that was a big issue.
Well, I think to kind of go back into the full picture, you talked about in the same week being at this crossroads. Do I accept this full-time position on campus? Do I kind of start more intentionally pursuing ministry? Maybe can you just kind of catch us up where that took you? So you started working locally at the church, and then we know so many years later you retired as a minister, so kind of fill in that gap for us.
Well, I guess I'd have to say in preface to that Mary and I together have always followed where we felt like we were being led more than we have set or charted a course for ourselves. Now, again, that can sound good or bad. How it depends. You look at it like you're lazy and don't have any goals. But really, we just kind of followed where life led more than anything else. And that was kind of on purpose, really, because we felt like that we could be of benefit to each other and others wherever we were. And so we just kind of followed that. Now, we had general goals, right? But nothing specific, like I'm going to work at that place or whatever. So we went to work for the church here, St. Andrew's Church, and I was youth minister, Christian ed director, and campus minister, all wrapped into one, and also preached and taught and so on, and was involved around campus. And then I realized that wasn't going to last forever because I was non-ordained in that position, and somebody, that's not where you want to be non-ordained. I was only able to do that because the priest was generous and a good friend of mine. So he knew I was looking, and so in the midst of looking, I got a phone call from Holland Hall School in Tulsa, Episcopal School, and they were looking for a chaplain, and they hadn't found the right match yet. And they asked me if I'd come over and interview, and so I did. And the person who knew about it was a former chaplain from OSU, so there's a connection, a personal connection there. And they hired me on the spot. So we moved to Tulsa. I was there with that school for 4 years. And at that time, Mary was not working in the library. Mm-hmm. And did you take some coursework then?
I took some time off. Angela was born.
And so we were able, then during that same time, we wound up directing the Episcopal summer camp in Oklahoma. So all summer we were at a camp, and school year we were at the school. And so we really didn't have anything else we did, period. No vacation, no nothing, just camp and school for 4 years there. And it was during that time that we began to think, well, if we're going to do this work, because that was a job a priest had formerly done. The camp job was a job a priest had formerly done. So I'm doing stuff priests do. Mm-hmm. And so maybe I should be a priest, right? But I still did not have the certainty that one can claim that for yourself. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. It was kind of like I saw that as being prideful. Of being able to say, oh, yeah, I want to be a priest.
It was more than just like a job opportunity.
Right, exactly. Mm-hmm. And so I was waiting for some confirmation from that, and this is literally the truth. The phone rang one day, and it was the bishop, who's the guy in charge of the church. And he says, I want to see you and your wife in my office this afternoon. So I'm thinking, geez, what have we done wrong? Is there something I don't know about? So we get there, and what he basically says is, I'm tired of waiting for you to make up your mind. I want you to go to seminary and be a priest. And so I said, okay, we'll do that. And so he cleared the way with some issues financial and other things that we need to sort out, job things and so on to make it possible. So we went to Seminary Southwest in Austin, Texas, and loved our 4 years there. It was just a wonderful time. Mary went to work for attorneys at the time and worked away from being a receptionist to being a legal secretary for a nice firm, really nice firm. And then we came back to Oklahoma and went to Tulsa for a year as a curate. We had this little training period. And so I did that for a really big church in Tulsa for a year. And I liked it. It was okay. It was not for us. It just seemed to be too much church and so on. And so I got another phone call, actually a letter this time, from another friend who had known me, who said there's a job opening at an Episcopal school in Austin, Texas, at a boarding school. Would you be interested in that? Yeah, I might. So again, we drove down there, and they hired us on the spot.
And ping pong back and forth.
Yes, back to Austin for 3 more years, right? Mm-hmm. And we did that, enjoyed it. Our kids enjoyed being on the campus. It was really like adding summer camp to Holland Hall. It was like putting the two together. But then there was something very intensive about that on several levels. One was just a combination at that time of old entrenched faculty with young faculty, and I was part of the young faculty, and that was not such a great thing every day, sometimes fine, sometimes not. And the other thing was that it was boarding school in transition. Some day students, some boarding students. We were living on campus with the boarding students. And one night I'm, putting other people's kids to bed. Mary's putting other people's kids to bed. And we're thinking, we're almost 40. This is not the way we want to
Our
raise
kids were back at the house by
By
themselves.
themselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
With a dog.
Oh, that's hard.
Yeah. So we started looking, and we got an opportunity right away in Oklahoma, in a little small town called Duncan. That, strangely enough, I'd never visited while going around high school educations. So we went there, and again, had an impromptu interview, and they hired us on the spot. And so we were there for 11 years, and our kids went through junior high and high school there, graduated. We built another church. Built onto the church, doubled the size of the facility and the size of the congregation. It was Mayberry. Literally, because Ron Howard was born there, so it was one of those places that we call Mayberry. You knew everybody. You could recognize people by their car and their dog's name, all that kind of thing. But when we got to a certain point, then we felt like that we'd taken that church about as far as we could. It was going to survive and be fine with or without us. And I was moving toward 50. And we thought, if we're going to do something, we need to do it now before I'm no longer as employable. And so we looked through several different opportunities for about a year and a half. And the one that hit was St. John's Norman, which, strangely enough, was a church that Mary's dad had been at for a while. So here we are back in Oklahoma at St. John's in the middle of OU country. It was very painful at first because they play Boomer Sooner from the speakers at every opportunity. So we had to get used to that.
You adjust.
Yeah.
But we have to come here now and then for, as Mary calls her, orange fix. So eat some hideaway pizza, drive around campus, eat some orange. But anyway, we enjoyed that very much, and did that until the point of retirement, which was something we had agreed on with each other and with the church when we got hired. Because they said, "How long would you stay?" And I said, "How long would you like us to stay?" They said, "Well, until you retire." So I can do that. So 16 years later, we're retired, just before COVID hit. So.
That is probably convenient for you to not have to navigate those complications.
More than convenient. I gave thanksgiving and praise for that every day because a lot of phone calls and conversations with brother and sister clergy were in the big middle of that, and commiserating with them over how to make this happen instantly, because no one in our church, our denomination, had AV equipment or anything to make that happen. No one even knew how to do Facebook,
And supply in those months just disappeared because everyone snatched it up.
Exactly. Yeah, it was very interesting. But we enjoyed our time. We heard a lot of people talk about how retirement would be awful for people for married couples. Sometimes they can't stand beside each other after a while and so on. And we have not felt that at all. We enjoyed the heck out of that year of exile. We're stuck in the house.
It was kind of a strange year.
Yeah.
And I have to remember back to it, where nobody really knew, nobody really did anything. You didn't go anywhere at first.
And I imagine, even just in your position, you're working weekends, you're busy. So to not just retire, but to have a year where there were no expectations to do anything, like that's got
It was very interesting. I did it pretty well, honestly. I got lazy real fast. Well, I miss people. Mary's a little bit more of an introvert than I am. She's a librarian. That's required. But I need people.
Well, I have just a couple questions to wrap up. I appreciate you sticking with me for so long. I wanted to go back to the comment you made about kind of the overlap you saw between student work, higher education, and ministry work.
Yes.
Because I thought about it, just there is a service-oriented aspect of it. And then you talked about even on campus having to know everybody and the friendliness involved. Like, it seemed like there were a lot of overlap in terms of, you said too, even just like bookkeeping and budgeting. So if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. This is a topic I could talk a lot on. But I can just say that my seminary degree was an exceptional theological and liturgical education, which I think is exactly what a seminary should be. It was not an education in how to, very much. And we had some of that, obviously, some of the basic kind of things, but not much. How to do liturgy, yes. How to do, hymn picking and
how to navigate different personalities.
But it really wasn't even much of that. So there was nothing about running a not-for-profit corporation. There was nothing about a volunteer recruitment. There was nothing about budgeting or fundraising or any of those things that are so crucial. And so I felt like for two reasons I had a lot of help there. One was while I was here with both my degree program and high school and college relations. It was just a huge leg up. And then the fact that we had worked in the church as lay people and done a lot of those things before I ever went to seminary. And so I came out of that experience telling people, if you can put it off for a while and go later in your life, which is hard to do financially, if you can go later in your life, after you've done some things that are significant, then you have a lot more experience to bring to it. Then you have something to compare with and say, how's this different? How's this alike? And what can I do? Which makes a huge difference. And then the other thing was, when I was in Duncan, which was the small congregation, I wasn't required to work as hard as I did in the bigger congregation. So with the congregation's permission and encouragement, I was involved in the community a lot, Rotary president and on boards and, even Duncan Little Theater, sang and danced in some plays. But the thing that really was helpful, I was on the board of the Simmons Center Corporation, which was a not-for-profit that was the community's recreation center, fine arts center, and convention center all in one, big $12 million facility. I was on the board for like 9 years. So in that situation, I had to deal with, goals of the institution, training of board members, fundraising, hiring and firing of the director, all those kinds of things at a very high level. And if you couldn't figure out how to read a budget, you were in trouble. Well, at first I didn't, but I learned, right? So you grab an older member of the board who knows what they're doing. You say, okay, what is this about here? So not-for-profit corporation management, personnel management, curriculum development. I mean, I wrote most of the curricula for the small church I was in because it doesn't exist. Curricula are written for big churches where you have a class of 5-year-olds, a class of 6-year-olds, a class of 12th graders or whatever. A little church, you have a younger than high school and high school and older. That's the classes we have, pretty much. And then toddlers. Mm-hmm. And so there's no curricula for that. So we wrote those curricula, and Mary would help me with resources on those because we had those backgrounds, which made it really helpful. So yeah, I think that it was a tremendous benefit. And I think that's what I'd recommend. I recommend people have a degree in something like personnel management or student services or, whatever, because all that people stuff is huge, and you just have to like it, number one. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the trouble, too. I mean, having some experience with this before you get in the priesthood, because I really did know some priests who got in the priesthood and weren't happy with it. Because in their mind, they were going to be some sort of theological recluse. And I guess watching Jimmy movies with Bing Crosby, they're going to be hanging around, reading the Bible, and, people are going to come by and confess, and that's basically the job, Saw a few murders on the way. I guess that's Father Brown. But the reality is you're just knee-deep in people all the time. And it's people who many times have problems, or people who are causing you problems, or people who are arguing with each other, or people you have to get together on the same page so you can do something together in the church. And yeah, that's huge. And if that's not something you enjoy, it's painful, it really is. And I've had several priest friends who got out of the business for that reason, because they thought, oh my goodness, this is not what I thought I was going to be into here. And the church is not exempt from people being just like they are any place else. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've already kind of answered this question, but I want to open it up to both of you. When you look back over your college time, both as a student working in the library, are there any other lessons or takeaways that come to mind thinking back at your time at OSU, life lessons learned? I feel like we got some of that from you, so I was wondering, too, for you, if there was anything that stands out. It's okay to say no.
Well, I did learn a lot of life lessons. One was in the reserve room was you hired students to work. So at that time, you had to go through this notebook that was a 3-ring binder and just look at their form and then call and see if they could come in. It was a very tedious job. But also you learn about people skills and who's going to be able to work together. And I learned a lot about that
Mm-hmm.
and how sometimes even their families can intervene on their behalf and how you have to deal with that, which was shocking to me.
Yeah.
That students' parents will still have influence on them in
Mhm.
college, yeah. Mhm.
Like you're working them too hard, or could I come in and help them do their work? And, I mean, I laugh, but that did happen to me. So,
Mm-hmm.
so I learned a lot.
I think my big one, I've talked a lot about, my big one would be this. My friend Chris Corbett, who I mentioned, and I moved into an apartment our sophomore year. I'd been with a different roommate the year before. And then we were roommates until I got married. And we did something that seems minor. We went down, and when we changed our license plates out, back then in those days, you got licensed wherever you wanted to, you know. Well, we got them here. And back in those days, your license plate had the abbreviation of the county you live in. So it's a PA for Payne County. So we got license plates in Payne County and registered to vote here in our sophomore year. And the reason we did that, because we both figured we were going to be in school for a while. He went on to get a doctorate, and I went on, obviously, some more. And it seemed to us as sophomores that even graduating with our bachelor's was an insurmountable chore, too far away to imagine. And how are we ever going to get there? And so we basically said, we're living in Stillwater, and we're going to school. And that made all the difference in the world. You know, we're living in Stillwater. We're having a life right now. We're living life right now.
Mm-hmm.
We have friends. We have hobbies. We're doing things that are fun, and we're going to school. We didn't neglect our studies, but that shift in attitude, you know, saying, I'm here because I'm trying to get a degree versus I'm here living my life and I'm going to get a degree, you know, made all the difference for me.
Yeah. Great advice for students to hear now, it sounds like.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to talk about that we haven't covered yet?
Not that I can think of.
Come on. Anything?
Mm-mm.
No, I can't think of anything either. I just think that, you know, in the changes and chances of life, which is a line from an Episcopal prayer, and the changes and chances of life, I feel very fortunate that we are able to connect at OSU.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Big part of our life.
Most of our life.
Yeah. The college and then just that decade you were here, it seems very formational for everything you did afterwards.
It did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that, you know, it really was just a series of events that led up to our going out, you know, everything that could have not happened that way. And it's even more than I've said. It's actually too long of a story to tell, but there are lots of different little things that took place that, you know, that pointed that direction. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And the fact that we had some really good people here who helped guide and direct us. In fact, we're having dinner tomorrow night with a couple who are still involved in the church and still friends after all these years. And they were one of those mentor couples who were just a little bit older than us. So while we had that role with people below us, they had that role for us. And she worked in various places, including the university. He worked at Votech, I think. And both retired now. But, you know, if we get to a spot, we go to their house, you know, and just show up. And they'd take us in.
Feed us dinner.
Mm-hmm.
Ice cream. Let us spend the night on the couch if we wanted to, you know, whatever. You know, and it was just nice to have that. People just a little bit ahead of you, you know, to kind of, and little things like buying a house, you know, or whatever. You know, it was scary, you know, they bought one before already and knew how to do that. You know, so it was good stuff, yeah. So we benefit from that. And wonderful people like Russell Conway and Bill Powell, who I still am indebted to.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for sitting down with me today. It's been a pleasure just hearing about your lives and for just everything we talked about today.
Appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.